Thanks very much, folks. I'm Steve Safaro. I'm with Access Communications, and I work with a number of different associations, and very happy that you're here. This is kind of the part two of what we talked about in the RMR Opportunities session, which was right across the hall. This is best practices for handling remote video. You're going to see some interesting opportunities for actually how video is associated with different services, some of the different software opportunities that are available in the industry, and we'll give you some real-world examples. Now, at the end of this, there's going to be some confidential information based on some crime research studies that we've done, which is going to be a new opportunity for predictive policing, and it's kind of an interesting overview because this type of thing is going to be available to you as a service, and it gives you an example of how to use business intelligence. But with that, let's get into it. One thing that's interesting about cloud computing is a subset of the remote video market, and it really gives the remote video a great opportunity to distribute it on a mobile basis. And you can see here that there's great growth, and 80% of Fortune 1000 companies are going to be are paying for cloud computing services. 30% of those are paying for infrastructure, and basically what that means is a lot of you folks are already doing business with companies that are paying for infrastructure as a service. The biggest, what's interesting, last week was the Cloud Expo in New York. This is a show, a trade show, that jumps around the country, and actually it goes to San Francisco, it goes to New York, it goes to Washington, D.C., and it goes to Seattle. What do those cities have in common? Can anybody tell me? Let's see how much you know about cloud computing. It has to do with the network. Does anybody live in those cities, by the way?
Those are the NACS.
That's exactly right. They're actually network access points. And one of them is also Miami, and it's a home of a company called Terramark, kind of small company, right? What's really interesting, one time I had an opportunity to visit their facility on the ground floor. You just walk in and you'll see cages of one labeled Louis Vuitton, one labeled Subway, one labeled Burger King. Who do you think's on the second floor? It's a government agency, the Department of Energy. So it's very interesting is that the federal government is already using the cloud for infrastructure as a service. It's not going to be too far down the road that it's going to be using cloud computing for security purposes. It's already using it for identity management. The CIA actually earlier, was it mid-year, did a very large contract with AWS, Amazon Web Services. So it's very interesting, but you might say to yourself, the government is very, very concerned about cybersecurity. So is the cloud that secure? Well, the cloud has done a tremendous job with credentialing, authentication, and managing the security at device levels and at the content level. Keep in mind that one of the great things about handling remote video, especially how it's served out at the cloud, you have an opportunity to apply content management where the source of the video is. What's the biggest fear that law enforcement and public safety has about video? It winding up on YouTube, right? Anybody use iTunes here? So iTunes, what iTunes does is essentially digital rights management. What you're going to see more and more is the use of video content that is authenticated. So the only way it's going to run is if it's authenticated from what's known as a credentialing authority, or the consuming device that the video streams to has the roles, rights, and privileges necessary to accommodate it. So a credentialing authority, an example of a credentialing authority is some entity that offers a digital certificate. So the digital certificate is both given to the producer, in which this case it might be the camera, or it might be a recording server that might distribute the video, and then the consumer, which is the mobile device in this case, if you're using your mobile device to play back some HDTV video. So it's kind of a very interesting progress that we're seeing. One thing that's really important for you to really understand is that solutions are adopted when they fit into either a security master plan or a crisis plan. How many of you folks went to the luncheon yesterday where the gentleman from Sandy Hook was there, right? So what did he talk about first? He didn't necessarily talk about technology, but he talked more about readiness. So readiness, crisis management, the ability to react and provide event management, all of those are contained in a lot of these terms in this mosaic. So the ability to protect it is in cybersecurity. The ability to execute within a set of standard operating procedures is contained within your security master plan. The ability to serve out the content, which is quite often the video surveillance, or it could be audio information, is done from a service provider. It could be from in the form of hosted video. It could be managed services. It could be done from a central station. And in a lot of cases, this video has metadata associated with it, meaning that it is tagged. But in all cases, probably one of the best things for you to realize with regard to remote video is that somebody's going to buy it if it fits into their plan, or if they're able to use it and investigate. So one thing I did with the last class, and I'm going to ask you very briefly for this, if you had one choice for security, and I'll get into this very shortly, but in a lot of cases, the unified security plan for your practitioners is very much associated with being reactive or proactive. Are you interested in reacting or focusing on that action of managing a crisis regardless of what it is? Or are you interested in staying ahead of the threat? Do you have perhaps a platform where you've mined a lot of information and you've got some video analytics there that are taking a look at the perimeter boundaries and looking for changes, and perhaps recognizes some abnormal behavior, when it sees it, and is able to analyze the over a longer period of time, the normal, quote-unquote, normal behavior, and recognize the abnormal behavior and stay ahead of the threat. And use an adaptive process, which is very interesting. So some of these processes are adaptive, and some of them are not necessarily adaptive. One, I'll show you examples of both, and the use of video surveillance with both of those. Now here's the question. If you were a security practitioner and you had to design your security master plan with a bias towards being able to react to a wide variety of incidents, you don't know what the incident is going to be. It could be, a threat that you know about already, or something that you don't know about it. Or if you want to protect yourself against quantifiable threats that you know how to react to, what are you going to choose? How many of you would say you want to react and be reactive and focus on reactivity? How many of you would say you want to be proactive? Very consistent. Okay. Now this is going to be interesting because I just got off the phone on a conference call and with the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Division, and this is a group that actually manages one of the programs that I coordinate standards with. It's actually called the Video Quality and Public Safety Group. And this group, it's really interesting. It is composed of public safety people. When I asked this question at their last event last year, unanimous, reactive. Very interesting, huh? Why do you think that is? Because they don't, yeah, go ahead.
Some things you can't predict, some things
Thank you. Some things you can't predict. So this is what they're dealing with, is an evolving set of circumstances. In some cases, it was interesting. One of the speakers at the last event was Sam Hood, who's, I believe, a lieutenant in Baltimore Police Department. They have every year, what do they have? A Grand Prix, right? Where they actually close out a portion of the city. You can get in and out of certain areas, but imagine having Grand Prix racing right downtown. You know, it opens up a whole new set of potential threats. So they actually set up a system that turned out to be quite interesting. They leased out a very expensive camera that has essentially wide area, multi-megapixel, and kind of does imaging known as wide area surveillance, and then couple that with some managed services cameras that they put up on a temporary basis. So it was kind of very interesting, and they also used both license plate capture recognition, and they also used some degree of face matching. I'm not going to say facial recognition, but low population face matching. So I asked the same question to it was interesting, it was a READ event. It was called ISC 1-to-1 for campus security, unanimous. Campus security professionals, university professionals, a few K through 12 that were involved with Child Protective Services, unanimous reply. They want to be able to react to that. So it's kind of interesting. One thing to consider also is that you need to protect the video, and your physical and cybersecurity are related, and you need to be very careful and get intelligence from different site vulnerabilities and exploits from within. I gave this example in the last. One of the worst things that you can do is to loan your phone to somebody. It's interesting. A lot of us complain about iPhones. One feature that the iPhone has is that it has a proprietary operating system, right? They have a proprietary group of Apple developers, and you know what? The system is pretty well protected and locked down unless you do what? You jailbreak it. And what's interesting is that there are companies that develop keyloggers that primarily develop to keep track of your kids, but people use it as malware. So what happens is that this is one of the biggest areas of threat. Imagine if somebody recorded all of your keystrokes on your mobile device and emailed it on a daily basis for a 1-week period. What would that do to your life? Probably interrupt it. Then worse yet, what if somebody started withdrawing micropayments? Small enough that it was worth their while, but not large enough so that you would notice. So it's kind of interesting, but this type of vulnerability is very, very important and to consider, especially with the devices that are going to handle the remote video. So very careful with that, and don't do something like this. What's wrong with this picture? Exactly. You're not exactly protecting your critical infrastructure. So start with the basics, and the video surveillance that you deploy, what use is your remote video if you've already identified your primary targets? It's really amazing, but the cable heads that are coming into facilities for your telecom are often very well advertised. I live in Phoenix. My girlfriend works at one of the largest hospitals there, Phoenix Children's Hospital. Beautiful facility, so proud of it. Their power plant has a dedication to it, and they have identified it as the main power plant for the entire complex. It's probably one of the most incredible things around. Fortunately, the type of threat that we fortunately have in Phoenix is not that type of threat, but you know what? You wouldn't probably see that in New York, where it's identified. These buildings are pretty nondescript. Or even Miami, that Terramark facility that I was talking to you about, that hosting provider, it's a pretty nondescript multi-story building, brick, with a lot of wire, razor wire around it, and, some cameras, and, you kind of wonder what's in there, but You know, it's not like you're going to be spending a lot of time trying to figure out what it is unless you belong there. You know, but what happens is that if you advertise it, it could be an extremely big problem. So let's take a look at what we used to look at video as, and this will pave the way for how you're going to understand how to use remote video and handle it. So it's amazing, but you know, even the forward thinkers that I have in the research crew that are doing some video-based research for first responders, they spent a lot of time in coming up with this. The unfortunate thing is that this essentially got outmoded about a year after we published it, which was about 4 years ago. And it's amazing. You don't see any infrastructure as a service there. You just see a display. You don't necessarily see, you know, a mobile device, but you might see video equipment. You have lens, image capture. That's actually pretty good. You know, I like that. I'm a photographer, so I like lenses. You know, I know that that's an important thing to add to visual acuity. You know, I know a number of you folks are too. But you know what? It's interesting. This nebulous processing and transport, you know, that might be totally different and not a discrete, defined area. So this is a concept of how it really has revolved. And today's video ecosystem is essentially taking a look at the camera as a producer of data. You know, one of the agencies that I work with, the IECP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, they came out with a standard called in-car video. Take a look at it. If you need a copy of it, I'll be happy to send it to you, but it's a pretty good standard. And it refers to the video data as digital multimedia content. Now, this is very cool. It's actually a really great definition. They did something. It's kind of interesting. You know, you say law enforcement was more advanced than the security industry, and they actually were, because the digital multimedia content definition incorporated the video data, right? Incorporated audio, also incorporated feature data or metadata. It really wasn't popular at the time, but they identified it as feature data. So those three aspects identified the DMC, or the digital multimedia content. The understanding that video is used as data is a first very important step to how you're going to use remote data, your remote video. You treat it as data, and all of a sudden, now the ability to accumulate a massive amount of it is there for you. What else is pretty good on this? I'm not even, you know, it's interesting, but I only mentioned the cloud once. It doesn't necessarily have to be a cloud. It could be a closed system. It could be a small system on an application server. You know, the application server can actually be on your laptop, where you just provision the camera first, and it stays as kind of a closed system until you need it, until you need the video. So it acts like its own embedded NVR, or it goes to a network. It goes to a private cloud or a public cloud. You know, I mentioned both because the use of remote video for both private cloud and public clouds are equally important. Understand both, because what you're going to have a situation is that your business is not necessarily just going to be based on, you know, you deploying video as a service, but it's also going to be deploying that quote-unquote video as a service, but within the organization. So a lot of these companies, major corporations, are doing deployment of private clouds and public clouds, essentially. I'm not going to say at the same time, but there's as much of both. So by 2015, in fact, Network World magazine predicts that it's going to be almost a 50-50 split of, you know, hosted type services, software as a service, and internal private cloud type services that are used. There's a very little difference between a private cloud and a network, but one big difference is that you virtualize. You make use of your resources for multiple solutions. Something that we kind of started talking about when networks first came into being. And of course, the consumers of the video Might be a display, it might be a mobile device with applications, and you have something on the upper right-hand corner that manages your data. So essentially, if you like to keep everything, it's good news for you. How many of you folks have a significant other that likes to keep too much, right? You find yourself not finding stuff, right? Wouldn't it be wonderful if you had a way of cataloging that? Well, you know what? We give you a way of doing this. The providers of the video solutions, including Access Communications, we have a way of tagging the video. The video management companies that are out there on the show floor, they have a way of doing searches that way. Why is this important? Well, the reason it's not necessarily that significant right now, because you know what? Cloud computing hasn't hit this industry as much, but once you start having a lot of data, right, it gets very expensive to store it, especially if you want to have it on hand. So what do you do with that data? You kind of say to yourself, I have some data that I need to have at my fingertips at all times, right? Do you need to have everything at your fingertips at all times? Not if you've tagged it correctly. If you've made it searchable, you could move it to your slow-moving portion, your slow-moving storage. Amazon came out with a service called Glacier for exactly that purpose. Dell also has a service like that. EMC has a service like that as well. Once they move it over, I know it's kind of a funny term, Glacier, but you know what? What's the worst thing that you can do? Move all this stuff over to a slow-moving storage and not have it be searchable. What's going to happen? The period of time that it takes you to do a forensic investigation is going to be a long time. Stanley Cup riots, City of Vancouver, what is it? 98? 94, right? It took them about 18 months or something like that. But you know what? They did something really interesting. They actually used wide area video surveillance. They put up I don't know if it was a Facebook page or a social media page of the most highest resolution image that they could find of the crowd outside of the arena, and said, hey, tag yourself in this picture. This was the amazing coup that the Law Enforcement Video Association and them came up with. It was great. It led to over 18,000 arrests, because what happened was people, loving social media the way it was, they tagged themselves in the pictures. And some people, were obeying the law, and some people were not. So they later were able to identify the people in the C-stores that were breaking in, and the banks, and use that higher resolution picture as forensic video. So the wonderful thing about it is they made that feature data usable and searchable. They had the features of that. They put it away. They had a lot of different images, but they had, person with, red jacket, shaved head, whatever, tattoo, who knows. And it's amazing, but it led to a lot of arrests. Took them a long time, but you know what? They got it done. And today, a lot of organizations use that. In fact, City of Baltimore uses that for the Grand Prix also. So hopefully that framework helps you. The opportunities are organized by as a service, and it's kind of interesting. There's mobility as a service, there's software as a service, infrastructure as a service, and business intelligence or business data as a service. What happens is that how many of you folks are thinking of deploying a mobile application for your business? How many of you folks have customers? You have maybe some customers that their behavior is using a mobile device. I'll tell you, I'm surprised that not more of you raised your hands. It's expected that by 2016, I think, or 2015, that everyone on the internet that actively uses the internet is expected to have 4 devices per person. That's 4 devices, most of which are mobile. So you're going to have some type of tablet, some type of laptop, a smartphone, and maybe a desktop computer, and that's the only thing that you don't lug around. And believe it or not, you don't use it that often. But 3 out of those devices are mobile. So what's interesting is they have their own types of characteristics, and in the same way, remote video needs to be optimized for the mobile device. There's a publication, it's called the Video Quality Handbook, Digital Video Quality Handbook. It actually just got published on DHS's website. The latest update actually contains a chart for mobile device resolutions. So it gives you the expected bandwidth for each one of these video streams. You can actually get on the website that I'll give you shortly. This presentation, by the way, you're going to be able to download this presentation from my Google Drive. Next week, I'm going to leave it up there for a period of a couple of weeks. You can just use the search terms, and it'll be public. It'll also be on the ESX website. But mobile computing as a service is so important. It's really important to actually have an optimized server and an optimized service by an organization that understands the security requirements for mobile devices and the requirements and the behavior of your the person that you're, or the company that you're actually doing the service for. It is not a bolt-on. It's amazing how many companies make this mistake. They make the mistake of, oh, I'm just going to add on a mobile application to my current website. That is your first mistake. It's actually better if you start from scratch and have a dedicated mobile server where the content changes for the actual user. You ever notice applications like Foursquare? Anybody use Foursquare here? You know, you check in to your own home and get points, right? Okay, that's really boring, but you know, that's all right. What's interesting, it gives you little tips. Those tips change. That's a unique feature of a mobile information server. So what happens is it compares some actual data that they've mined based upon your location. So they already know your location because you've enabled that in your as a requirement for Foursquare, and they use your location and they push out information associated with that check-in. And this is kind of cool because advertisers pay for this. They pay for a tip to happen, you know, for this, or they also pay to get customer information on what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. So the mobile information servers are extraordinarily important. And they incorporate support of many different devices. So service providers are able to support, you know, not only the servers, but all these different types of devices. The devices are getting as powerful as our laptops were about a year ago. And it's kind of interesting, but mobility for remote video is probably one of the most significant areas. There's a number of different companies like SureView, Dice, iView. They all support mobile devices. Some of them have cross-platform support, but this slide is able and very important for you to get a really strong guidance on how to deploy a mobile server. So in the last class I asked, what do you use your mobile device for? And a gentleman answered, my email. And it's kind of interesting, right? And we found out it was because his boss is sending him too much email, right? You know, most bosses have email behavior that is going to be the subject of mining in the future. So you have a boss that sends you about 10 emails all at once, and then you don't hear from them for about 2 to 3 days, right? Rick, please don't tell Scott that I said that, okay? But he's a great boss, and he's got a big pie to manage, right? He's got a big business development group to manage, but his email behavior is going to be mined in the future. So email servers are going to basically say, you know what? If my boss doesn't answer his emails like every couple of days, maybe he's on vacation or something like that, and then answers about 6 or 7 of them at once, it's going to be very difficult for you to prioritize that. But the behavior of that, the ability to see that behavior, that mobile type behavior, is going to automatically prioritize that and maybe feed it to me every so often and remind me of that. So that is mobile devices as a service. So it's not just email. A lot of the applications that people use mobile devices for is associated with their behavior. So it's so very important to find out how they use the mobile device before you provide some security services. So the costs related to the content and the apps, are associated with the sophistication. Who's probably one of the most biggest user of mobile applications? First responders. So it's interesting, but this is their new website, firstresponder.gov. And how many of you folks have public safety, any one of these types of disciplines as a customer? Good job. Isn't this a growing market? It's interesting. City surveillance from IMS research last year is predicted to triple in size by 2017. Smaller market than the education market, but it's expected to triple in size. So that's a strong amount of growth. How much of that is available to you? My recommendation is take a look at the secondary cities, the smaller cities. What happens in a lot of the larger cities, especially with the remote video, they do something called federation. And all this is a fancy term for just adding on or incorporating the video surveillance cameras of some shared areas into a video management system that's already been sold to them. Personally, I don't particularly care for that practice because it's not necessarily associated with the latest and greatest. The Central Station Alarm Association and ESA is composed of a lot of vendors that have some really strong applications that are associated with Central Station automation, which are not necessarily known by public safety. And it's the more that you can tell that story of how some of these companies are doing this and handling the remote video really strongly, like I said, like the Dice, iView, and SureView, all these companies do such a great job in linking the video with other data, the better off they're going to be to get incident video. So this is their new website: EMS, explosives, fire, hazmat, law enforcement, search and rescue. A lot of folks think that it's just first responders or just law enforcement. It's not. That's only part of the story. Yes?
Do you find municipalities are using PSIM at all, or is it just video coming into their SIM?
PSIM, one of the largest users of PSIM is actually the federal government. So what I'm finding is, like the majors, still have separated video management systems together with other types of devices. Most municipalities utilize computer-aided dispatch, so a unified solution that is outside of our industry. Go see a company called Harris, okay, and other companies like Motorola. Motorola does some incident management, but the critical piece, remember I mentioned location applications, is the location. So they link the video management together with this other application that provides for CAD, computer-aided dispatch. That's the driving force.
So PSIM, in my mind, is associated with access control, video, not sure what else, tying it all together.
Easy way of categorizing it, and anybody in the room, you can correct me, there's two real major ways that you use PSIM, and that's for a unified user interface and also a gateway application. So regardless of whether it's temperature monitoring, perimeter intrusion detection, burglar alarm systems, access control, video surveillance, local video, environmental sensing, you've got all this noise, and you want to prioritize it and place functions on it. That's probably the primary function of PSIM in a proprietary setting. Notice that the central station automation companies, you guys do this, right? Those of you that are in rec, you do this right? You're doing this right now on a central station automation basis. So the folks that understand what PSIM is don't necessarily know about central station automation, and that's why the central station automation companies are now labeling some of their functions as PSIM. So hope that helped you. But the big user of PSIM is FedGov in that case. Digital Video Quality Handbook, that's the link to it. This is a hyperlink in the presentation. You can get it. You can get this online. It actually contains a lot of those use cases. Okay, I'm going to try this. This is actually an interesting use of remote video. I'm going to play this video at the same time as on both computers. Okay. Oops, that didn't work. Let's see here. There we go. Oops. Great. Okay. Let's try that again. It's my iTunes working. Okay.
How was the last 48 hours been? Right, we've done well in the last 48 hours. Ridership has been down, though. We're running normal schedule with the exception of Copy Station, which will be closed for the foreseeable future. Ridership has been down a little bit, school vacation week as well. The other piece I'd like to talk about is our See Something, Say Something campaign. The system is safe and secure because of our passengers who report incidents to us of suspicious or unusual behavior. And we have an app now that we're getting a lot of use of lately, the CSAY app. You can download that on your cell phone and send us anonymous texts or pictures. And we've received a number of pictures through that app post-incident.
Can you hear this?
New this morning, the MBTA is allowing riders to fight potential terrorism on their cell phone.
The CSAY app is all part of the See Something, Say Something program, and it urges you to take pictures and send text messages to the MBTA police. Using the smartphone app.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get this in sync here.
Allowing riders to instantly share pictures, text, and location about anything.
We have a 1.2 million customers today, and
If you're on a team, it's a phrase you have probably heard. If you see something, you say something. If you're not able to get riders to report crimes, when they don't text you after your phone, you can say something without actually saying a word.
That leads to why the TSA just want to have your face buried in their phone. Now the MBTA is going to turn our smartphone into a card-ready tool.
Okay, so that's actually an example of a company called eLerts, and that company is one example of a new breed of companies that unify both an alerting mechanism with video. What it literally does is it sends a signal to the rail control center, in this case the MBTA, and the MBTA has a listing of known cameras that they have deployed throughout their system, and what they're able to do is to catalog all the alerts. So during the Boston bombings, they actually took in over 10,000 images and video clips from people's smartphones, and were able to instantly turn on and start capturing video surveillance that was associated with the locations of that particular service. So this is actually a very, very cool way of unifying video with mobile devices. So you can deploy this on a proprietary basis in a campus setting, or you can do it with public safety. So these are a couple of reference slides on managed video as a service, and here's kind of an overview on some examples of some of the solutions that are out there. So in this case, you'd have a service provider. It might be a central station operator, and they will support both mobile devices, customer sites, a monitoring center. This particular one is a couple of slides of a company called iView Now. This is an example of some of the solutions that they incorporate. So some of the solutions actually act as kind of a gateway within the application. There's others that also work within this and do PSIM, like DICE and SureView. We'll show you a couple of those. And some of the services include video verification and monitoring online camera status. You can see actually some of the different end user portals that are used, some of the different control panels, plus different relays, I/O modules, different IP cameras that actually go into this deployment that's contained within the cloud. So the customers don't have to worry about actually updating the software, because the software is unifying this video and audio and location-based data and alarm data right in the cloud. There's quite a number of other different solutions as well. One of them actually is DICE, and they have a very interesting solution that links audio in a lot of cases. So their matrix system accommodates the unification of many different types of DVRs on an online basis, and literally does what I call event management on steroids, or hyper event management. So they've got a really strong call engine. Essentially what they do, they can turn multiple cameras into add SIP features, or session initiation protocol. So essentially you're delivering some additional voice over IP compatible features even associated with the camera. So this is very, very cool, and it allows you to actually do some really strong incident alarm data management and get some of these reports. One area that they're starting to get into, I don't know if I mentioned it to you in this session, is digital health. The Digital Health Summit at CES this year actually tripled in size from last year, and it's expected to double in size next year. This is a very important area for you folks to get into as far as remote video. Remote triage, there's a company that makes a device called the LifeBot. The LifeBot sends telemetry about a patient information and makes use of HDTV cameras that could be at in first responders, the ambulances, and actually allows the remote diagnosis by, the techs or supervising physician back at the critical care facility where they're being transported. This is really important for stroke victims and life flight as well. There's a lot of dangers associated with digital health these days, especially with mobile devices, with self-diagnosis, but by far the remote triage is extraordinarily important. Now, you mentioned, somebody asked about PSIM. Here's some examples of PSIM that are deployed as an aggregating solution. So in a lot of cases, they're closed systems. They're not deployed on a central station basis, so they're not necessarily having two features which are extraordinarily important for remote video: agility and scalability. What's agility? Agility is the ability to take the video content and be able to serve it out among multiple devices. I talked about big data in the last session, the 3 V's. The velocity of data, or the ability to be able to have the data and be able to use it very quickly, find out the information, and in a lot of cases you might not have the ability to do that with untagged data. There's a number of different perspectives with selecting a service provider, and what's interesting is there's about 5 different white papers that I'm going to give you online that give you a step-by-step selection process to be able to selecting a cloud service provider. CSA is actually the Cloud Security Alliance. These folks are very much in tune with auditing and network security requirements of data centers and cloud security applications. So that perspective and that complete presentation, which shows you the security guidance, the identification of risk, privacy and data protection rules, that's actually all going to be available to you and very impactful when you're considering remote video. From a theoretical perspective, accountability, agility, I already talked about, cost, performance, assurance, security, privacy, and whether or not they have a usable service. So there's different perspectives to selecting it. Both are extraordinarily important. What I'm going to do is run through a few different important security trends and how they work with video. Big data, obviously we already talked about. The ability to tag the data through metadata is extremely important. It allows you to see the video. LPR, extraordinarily important. There's a standard coming out next year with by IACP. This is going to be one of the most significant uses of remote video. In fact, embedded LPR is available on many cameras these days, including ours, and it allows you to take the API and work with a back office system on an opt-in basis. What this means is the NCIC, or the National Crime Information Lab, actually has a database of persons of interest and vehicles of interest. So you can actually get a response back, not one that you're going to get sued about, but one that says, hey, listen, you need to investigate this vehicle further. Or you can use it in a totally benign way and say, you're in my database, you're supposed to be on campus, let you in. You know, and what happens is LPR is probably one of the most significant devices and applications for investigations. How people will conduct investigations is very important. Wireless spectrum, extraordinarily important. The private and public cloud adoption. These are all different topics that were reported on by security publications, IMS, CSAA. Remote guarding is going to extend tremendously. We're seeing very interesting growth there. You know, the use of PSAP, the ASAP, that program, that linkage between public safety and central stations, that's going to be very important. Not selling the large systems when they don't need it, when they just need small systems, is going to be a very significant trend. Mobility, I was talking about, and immersive imaging. So, just very briefly, I'm going to touch on a couple of different reactive video technologies. So this is actually what's known as video synopsis. You're seeing 24 hours in the lower center in Stuttgart, Germany. So what you're able to do is to identify the video in motion based upon a set of criteria, whether they're people, in this case, or just vehicles. Stop the video and actually go directly to the full content. So this is an example of one that's reactive and allows for a quick review. This was used in the Boston bombings, or a version of it, and it could be deployed on an entrance basis. Another type of technology which is really quite useful, this shows vehicles driving in the wrong direction, you know, so it puts a box around them. This shows you, this is BRS Labs, this is how we drive in Phoenix. We are always in a rush. We take the quick route on, you know, you just got that joke. Okay, good. Basically, this is a company that I was referring to before, kind of more of a proactive. So you let the video run for a longer period of time, it accumulates data about the behavior of the scene and gives you notification based upon off-normal conditions. This is heat mapping. Very, very useful for Operations Center. This is kind of an instant sale for you, for companies that are interested in deploying it on a retail basis, but also in an operations management. I mentioned in the other session, an automaker, a major automakers, bought our cameras just for the purposes of accumulating another application that does heat mapping. Totally not for security, but just to see where people were going and if people were moving around. You know, the ability to actually see the video is very important. So HDTV, you know, this is a technology on the left-hand side called Lightfinder, and it gives you a real-time view with no motion blur, and you'll see somebody starting to walk around a track. That's actually 10 o'clock at night. So it's a pretty strong technology. It won a Wall Street Journal Innovation Award. This is a company, there's a couple of companies, PlateSmart and IP Configure. Also IDV Solutions. They do high-speed LPR. LPR is just absolutely tremendous. It's going to be so significant for you and a great moneymaker, especially if you're in parking areas. So you can look into a law enforcement area. This is a company called Click2Stream, and they actually allow you to configure your camera yourself right online. And you know who uses this? Folks in the hospitality industry, but also in traffic reporting. So a lot of the traffic stations actually use this remote video technology. They self-provision it and get their traffic reports from this. So you remember the old way of distributing broadcast video? That's gone. So it's not totally gone, but it's there. I talked about this in the last session, the relative hosted video channel growth. Data growth is tremendous. One thing I want to mention is robotics. Robotics, so there's a robotics session here at ESX. Go to it. Take a look at it. This is going to be one of the most important growth areas within 2 years. You're going to start to see the first security-related robot systems mid next year. And what these are you're essentially going to have one that's going to be a very unique locomotive system that's primarily designed for data centers or distribution floors, but you're going to be able to send the robot out and communicate with the security guard. So the security guard is going to be able to not have to walk all the way out to a location. How do you think that robot is going to get connected to their system? It's going to be connected either by a private cloud or a public cloud. So what's interesting is that it'll be on the network internally, feeding the information, but overseas in Asia, one of the biggest growth markets for robotics is renting out these robots for remote surveillance. They just go around, the airports. So I think I'm just about out of time, and what I want to do is jump ahead to the very last topic, which is, I think you're going to find very, very cool. This is a study actually on predictive policing that I did with 2 cities. I called it Criminal Calendar, Criminal Mind. And 2 cities, City of Phoenix and City of Dallas, actually reported their crime stats over a 5-year period for me. And the results were pretty interesting. And you're not going to get this data online, unfortunately. I can actually give you, you're going to get uncategorized some of this in the download version. But in the city of Dallas, every single type of crime had a consistent month of the year as for the high and low. Whether it was business burglary, residential, vehicular burglary, even the more violent crimes like aggravated assault. Summarized on this slide, you can see a consistent pattern on a monthly basis. What kind of services fit that? A service-based business, which you folks are very much into. So this is a great RMR opportunity to sell the video data, to sell LPR, for those particular months involved. But you know what? City of Phoenix is actually on a time basis. Whereas Dallas was consistent on a monthly basis, City of Phoenix was consistent on a time basis. So they had the lowest crime, they had no correlation to month or different season, but they did have the best correlation of time frame. Lowest crime time was 0600 hours. Highest crime was around 11 p.m. You can see here we're just going through all of the robbery incidents for the city of Phoenix. So, I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. It'll be available to you online. All you have to do is search for the actual title, or feel free to stop by the booth. I'm going to have a limited number of USBs available there tomorrow or later on today for your use, or just shoot me off an email. I'll be happy to send it to you. Thank you so much for coming.